Welcome to episode 12, part B. 1987 would also bring about another classic game character of yesteryear to the Master System, called Wonder Boy, by a developer called Escape. In the game you played Bok-Lee Temjin, a kid his friends called Tom Tom for short, and he decides to do a daring rescue of the girl Tanya from the evil king who has kidnapped her. The game was a faithful port of the 1986 arcade game, which was simple, scrolling fun. On the NES, by the way, this game was called Adventure Island instead. The following year, in 1988, Wonder Boy would return in Wonder Boy in Monsterland. The game's plot was now 11 years later, and you are asked again to save the world by destroying all the demons and monsters and kill the dragon mecha. This was a much deeper game, adding RPG elements with the platform antics, which made it an extremely satisfying game. In his third outing in 1989, poor old Wonder Boy has been cursed by the ugly beast that he slayed. The curse turns him into a lizard man, and he must go on a quest to find the Salamander Cross to return him back to normal. This, in my opinion, was the best game to date, and the game retained its RPG and platform mix, but with the additional ability to morph into different animals, adding to the puzzle element. Now, however, things started to dive down the rabbit hole of confusion, as 1988 also saw an arcade and Mega Drive release of Wonder Boy called Wonder Boy in Monster's Lair. This was a return to the simple, ever-scrolling original, but with better graphics. Wonder Boy wouldn't return for many years until 1992, when the Mega Drive and Master System would release Wonder Boy in Monster World. The game thankfully went back to RPG and platform crossover again, and was an enjoyable romp, although the Master System's version isn't as good as the Mega Drive game. But back to 1987, and the Master System would be host to another long-standing classic series, with the great RPG Phantasy Star, set in the future in 3240 in the Algor solar system, where you played Elise, who, on the death of her brother, vows to seek revenge against her brother's killer and the evil King Lasik, who has released his deadly horde of creatures on the planet Algol. The game was a great RPG, with lovely graphics and futuristic setting, being a real refreshing alternative to the Zelda and Final Fantasy RPGs of the time. The Master System would also have some really cool peripherals released for the console. For example, in 1987 you could buy the Sega Scope 3D glasses. The glasses looked really quite cool and worked better than you would think when playing games, with each lens being blacked out alternately to give a 3D image. Then the images on the TV screen would alternate also to give that 3D look. Despite the clever product, only 8 games were compatible with the device, and most didn't have the confidence to work only with the glasses, offering a 2D alternative. The best 3D games released for the peripheral was Space Harrier 3D, which not only was a surprisingly faithful port of the arcades, but the 3D really does work quite well in the game. Less successful but still fun was Outrun 3D, which looked and played okay, although in my mind the 3D effect isn't quite as stunning as the Space Harrier 3D game. In 1989 the Master System would also see the release of the brilliant Psycho Fox game, which was an enjoyable platform game that made good use of the Master System's hardware, even if it's a bit difficult to get used to the jump mechanics in this game, especially for those like myself weaned on the Mario jump mechanics. Sadly, the game would never see a sequel. 1989 would also see the release of the Master System 2 console. This console looked far uglier, looking much more toy-like, but it would drastically drop the cost of manufacturing the machine and so drop the price of the console. Other great games released on the Master System console was the classic adventure game called Prince of Persia, created by Jordan Mechner, and it was released by Blooderbund in 1989. Previously, Jordan had already honed his skills on the technically brilliant Karateka beat-em-up released in 1984. This was a beat-em-up that would have the wonderful rotoscope animations that would become Jordan's trademark. However, in 1989, on his release of Prince of Persia, he would do it again, and this time having you play a prince who must run and jump and fight his way against the clock to rescue his beloved princess, who has been locked away by the evil Jafar. It was the graphics that really wowed at the time, and the fluid animation and tight gameplay winning over many a gamer, with the game being ported to almost every platform going. Another classic was California Games, released in 1987 by Epix. This had you play the Sun Bleach California themed events such as surfing, rollerblading, BMX, riding, frisbee, halfpipe and footbag. Other games I used to love on the Master System was the brilliant Trivial Pursuit game by Domark. This had you play the classic quiz board game, but it was made even better by the quiz master, who would taunt you or give you seemingly sarcastic praise. Another game that was pretty poor, but I loved it, was Alf. I was a huge fan of the American TV show as a kid, and so I loved this game for that fact alone. But anyway, back to 1987, and the Master System was only a little upstart trying to steal Nintendo's gaming's crown. Another two companies also joined forces to try and overthrow the big Empire, and this one would start to make Nintendo sweat, in Japan at least, taking a sizable chunk of their market. Those two companies was Nippon Electronic Company, better known by many as NEC, who brought the money and distribution, and Hudson Soft, who brought the smart high-powered chip design of the console. Hudson Soft was set up by two train-spotting brothers in Japan called Yuji and Hiroshi Kudo, and they named their company Hudson Soft after the American train called Hudson, which would run through the village where they grew up. On the 30th of October in 1987, the console that they would put together was released and called the PC Engine. The first thing that strikes you when looking at the console is its tiny, compact size. It really is a wonder of design, being one of the smallest home consoles. And when you consider the power under its hood, with it being the most powerful 8-bit around, it really is quite an achievement. The other thing that the console had going for it was that it didn't use cartridges, but the far cooler Hue cards, which were credit-sized game cards that stored the games upon. The game machine did really well, with an impressive game library built up of classic games released for the machine, and it had some of the best arcade ports released. In 1989, the machine would be redesigned for the American market and called the Core Graphics. The reason for the name change was because it was felt that the PC Engine would mislead consumers into thinking it was an actual IBM-style PC, personal computer. Over the console's lifespan, NEC and Hudson would release a manic array of variants of the machine that would take a full episode alone to cover everything. However, I'll go through some of the main devices. The main devices was the TurboGrafx 16, released in 1989, which came out to attempt to rival the Sega Mega Drive. And also in 1989 there was the TurboGrafx CD add-on, which was the first console peripheral to play games on the CD, but at a whopping $399. It was only for those with deep pockets. Thankfully, a belated release of the Turbo Duo in 1992 would see the console with the CD drive built in. But like with all consoles, it's not the hardware, but it's all about the games that count. And in this area, the PC Engine was massively successful, especially from Hudson's own games. One of the first major releases was Ys, Book 1 and 2. This was the perfect blend of Zelda and Final Fantasy. It was certainly one for hardcore gamers, with a lot of time having to be invested in it to get anywhere in the RPG, but your time spent with the game would be well worth it, with this being an absolute classic. The CD version of it was particularly gorgeous, with luscious graphics and some of the best video game music. Well, that was part B. Please go on to part C, where we look at other games on the PC Engine and look at later games released on the NES.